trade policies. What does this mean for global markets as supply chains shift? Where does Malaysia stand in the new trade landscape? Can Malaysia turn these changes into opportunities for growth and resilience? US trade shifts, Malaysia's opportunities. This is Money Matters. Hello there, good evening and welcome to Money Matters. I'm Muhammed Ahmad Hamdan and you're tuned into TV3, where you can also stream on Tonton. Joining us today is Regional APAC Lead of Ipsos Strategy 3, Kiranjit Singh. Thank you for taking the time to be with us here on Money Matters, Kiranjit.
You're welcome.
Now, Kiranjit, as more developing nations are gradually liberalizing their economies, Malaysia is one of them, to cope with evolving global trade pacts, we now have the US, the world's largest economy, enforcing a protectionist trade policy. With Trump's protectionist stance, what new trade and investment opportunities can Malaysia tap into?
Sure. I think what we need to do is we need to see there's no short-term fix, for example. So we need to, number one, we have to diversify in terms of products, markets, and also we need to also make sure that we are strengthening our ecosystem, right? I think what we have been doing is we are doing well. Okay. But we can always strengthen and find new markets and so on. So if you see the National Trade Blueprint, which was issued by MITI and Matrade about a couple of years back, it was clearly defined that it may happen, geopolitical tensions, tariffs can happen and so on. So the only way we need to manage the situation is diversify, right? So I think the diversification strategy, we need to catalyze that at a more accelerated phase than before.
But what sectors are we looking at here in terms of diversifying our economy?
I think in terms of diversification, there are two things, right? Number one, we need to export, right? And then we have to also have investment coming in. Okay. Right. So let's talk about investment coming in first, right? In terms of investment, because we need to understand where we are strong at. So without E&E is something that we are strong at. Medical devices we are strong at, and so on. So there's a lot more opportunities on that front. So for example, in Vietnam, while Vietnam is growing in terms of their FDIs and their exports and so on, but compared to Malaysia, they're still very much low valued in many sense. So in Malaysia, what we will have to do is to move up the value chain a bit more sophisticated products in terms of E&E and medical devices. Our ecosystem in both of these areas is the strongest in Southeast Asia. And I think we are a couple of years ahead than many of the peer countries. So we have to capitalize on this.
So with these global shifts that we are seeing, how can Malaysia attract more supply chain relocations as global companies diversify from China? And again, which sectors do you think are best positioned?
I'll come back to the same thing, electrical and electronics and medical devices and so on. Because if you see right now, when I say electrical electronics, it's not about computers and so on. So if you see a car right now, an EV car, right, it's basically a computer on wheels these days, right? So there's a lot more opportunities.
Computerized machines.
And so on, right? A bit of robotics and so on. But when to attract investments, for example, we need to have the ecosystem. Now, when we work with our clients at Ipsos, whenever we look for, we do go-to-market strategy, when we try to understand where they should place their factories, for example, China Plus One strategy. So obviously we look at Southeast Asia as totality, and then we look at which particular markets and country and so on. By far, I would say 3 out of 5 recommendations we have been giving to our clients have been Malaysia.
Okay.
for E&E and medical devices and so on, because we have the ecosystem. Ecosystem is the talent pool, the logistics, regulatory and a clarity in regulatory, the suppliers, the vendors, the whole ecosystem. So I think it makes Malaysia as an ideal destination for a China Plus One strategy.
Well, in terms of opportunities in Malaysia that offer all of those things that you have mentioned earlier, which states in Malaysia actually offer the most of those things, do you think?
Again,
is it Penang? Or?
Maybe I'm a bit biased, I'm from Penang. So.
Okay.
But I think it has to go back to the ecosystem, right? A couple of years back, I remember about 15 years back, when they said Penang was becoming too expensive. It is too expensive.
Yeah.
Right?
I agree.
So a lot of companies decided to diversify to, say, maybe Vietnam or Indonesia, right? And it was not successful. Many of them came back
to Malaysia.
And we have good contract manufacturers. Okay, so when you want to move your supply chain, it's not about packing your bags and moving, because you need to understand also the whole ecosystem. So in other countries, maybe they might give you certain incentives, talent pool is cheaper and so on, but the ecosystem there is difficult. For example, I remember there was one investor, a large MNC, and he told me that he went to a regional country and there was a problem with some of the machines. And he couldn't get maintenance support to kind of fix the machines for 2-3 days. And 2-3 days is a long time. Whereas in Penang, you call someone and somebody's there in the afternoon already to fix it, whether it's a disruption in your parts or machinery and so on. So I think the ecosystem is there. But I know Selangor is also doing a couple of good things there.
Yeah. Kiranjit, we want to look at how to strengthen ASEAN trade links, but hold that thought for now, because we're going to go for a quick commercial break. We're going to go for a quick break, so don't go away, because Money Matters will be back shortly. Welcome back. Regional APAC lead of Ipsos Strategy 3, Kiranjit Singh, with me right here in the studio. Now, Kiranjit, Malaysia is the chair of ASEAN for this year. How can Malaysia leverage ASEAN's trade pacts, RCEP, CPTPP, we have ATIGA within ASEAN itself, to build stronger economic ties despite shifting US policies?
I don't think it's a binary choice, whether US or the ASEAN trade. I think it's part of a diversification strategy. While we have all these trade pacts and so on within ASEAN and elsewhere, I think what we are seeing right now is non-tariff barriers within these trade pacts is still pretty high, right? Because many of these economies are still trying to boost their domestic markets, their exports. In many ways, they have a similar strategy. Right. So it's not a binary choice. I think as a diversification strategy, long-term diversification strategy is important. But nevertheless, we cannot do away without exporting to US and to Europe. Right. 13% of our exports is into US. 13% is huge. 1/3.
Okay.
1/3. You know what I mean? And what we export to US is where we are strong at. Electrical, electronics, and so on, right? Less on food and so on. So it's not a binary choice. I think what we're doing with the ASEAN, the RCEP, CTTP, all that is good. But they have the same challenges like Malaysia. So we will still need to rely, to some extent, growing our market in Europe, US, and also like Africa and Latin America.
But Trump just earlier this week has reiterated US's plans for the reciprocal tariffs for other countries. He's just went on with Canada, Mexico and China, but now he's saying that other countries are going to get the reciprocal tariffs done by the USO.
Yes. So it was supposed to be April 1st, then he moved to April 2nd.
Yeah.
He moved to April 2nd. But I believe they'll be carved out. For example, in Canada, now they are doing a bit of carving up for the automotive industry, because what they're learning is the supply chain is interrelated. For example, a lot of our components we are exporting to US are from the American companies like Intel and so on, right? So it has a domino impact, right? So I believe there will be certain carves out. I think we have to be prepared. I don't think our market share to US will decline from 13% or 200 billion ringgit to 100 billion ringgit overnight. Because when you increase a tariff of 10%, that doesn't mean the price of goods will increase by 10%. Typically, it's less than 10%.
But there will still be an increase.
There will be an increase. Whether it's 2% or 3% is fine. Whatever. So I think there will be a bit of a impact, but I don't think so it will be as great as the direct impact will be lesser of a worry to me, but the indirect impact, for example, what happens to China? If China is not able to export to US, where will they export?
Yeah.
Right. Our trade deficit with China, ASEAN trade deficit with China has doubled in the last 3 years. So, so if you see, that's why a lot of ASEAN economies, they're trying to tell to China, hey, we need to be sensitive to our local producers, but at the same time, we don't want to upset China. So I think there's a fine balance we need to make. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned earlier that Malaysia has some level of advantage when it comes to trade with the US compared with our regional peers in ASEAN. So what key factors can further enhance US confidence in Malaysia as a preferred trade and investment partner?
Okay, sure. So Trump's philosophy is the reason why he came up with these trade tariffs and so on. He feels that all the exporters have been taking advantage of the US, right? US have not gotten a fair deal. You know what I mean? So we need to show that we are sincere in doing our trade agreements with US. If you see psychologically, the NAFTA trade deal, which was done during Bill Clinton's time and so on, was not really a fair deal, a good deal for many Americans. It was good for certain rich Americans, but the working class did not really enjoy the what was promised in the NAFTA deal. So even in Detroit, what happened in Detroit is business came back, cities came back, but people never came back. So that left a certain scar on that, right? So besides making sure that we give a fair deal to in terms of our trade policies, IP protection is very important. So when to attract investment into Malaysia, we need to give assurance that, hey, we will respect the IP which is deployed in Malaysia, and we will not try to, if I use
transfer the technology?
Transfer technology is fine, but not steal the IP.
Okay.
You know what I mean? So IP, we respect the IP belonging to, say, who the investor and so on. IP protection is super important.
Okay, but how would that benefit Malaysia largely?
Transfer technology, stealing IP and transferring technology is two different
things. Yeah.
So we need FDIs. Malaysia needs FDI. Right. The only way we can attract FDI is by assuring that, besides the ecosystem, and we also have certain quality standards, IP protection, and so on, to give them the added assurance. Yeah.
Okay. Kiranjit, we're going to go for another round of break, so hold that thought. Okay. We're going to go for a quick round of break, so don't go away, because Money Matters. We'll be back shortly. Thanks for staying with us. Regional APAC lead of Ipsos Strategy 3, Kiranjit Singh, with me right here in the studio. Kiranjit, let's talk about Malaysia's appeal to investors. Based on Ipsos's latest data, what key strengths make Malaysia attractive to global investors amid evolving trade dynamics?
I think there are two factors. I think one is well known that the government is very open for trade, right? The policies is very welcoming for trade, whether it's FDIs or exports and so on. But what is unique is ASEAN economies, especially Malaysia, the general population think globalization and global trade is a good thing. So what does that mean? So that means the masses, the citizens, right, will not succumb to protectionist measures. And that will give less pressure to the politicians to be a bit more protectionist and so on. Compared to, say, for example, like European countries and America and so on, they are not so much in favor of global trade or globalization. So that is why you see a lot more pressure in their policy-making decisions and so on. Whereas in Malaysia, 70 to 80% of all Malaysians feel global trade, right, and FDIs is good for the country. So that gives a bit of leverage for policymakers still to give certain incentives for FDIs to come in and so on, right? That's number one. But what we can do better is in terms of branding, all right? I remember going to China not too long ago with a Malaysian exporter, and we were trying to sell a very sophisticated product to China. There was nothing wrong with the product.
Okay.
But for the Chinese consumer, they were not so, they thought Malaysia is a good destination for beaches, good food, electronics, but not high complicated machinery products and so on. You know what I mean? They feel that Malaysia does not have the proudness or the sophistication to produce that. It's just the branding aspect, right?
Okay.
So I think we can empower Madrid to do a bit more of that. Madrid is doing a good job, but I think in today's day and age, we need to increase the budget, right? And we should also repurpose the tagline, visit Malaysia truly Asia, beyond a tourism slogan, but also as an investment and an export slogan. I think we should leverage on nation branding. Yeah.
Okay. And what strategic moves should Malaysia prioritize to maximize economic gains from global shifts in trade and also investment?
First things first, I think we need to have our hygiene factors have to be strong. Now, we should be more market friendly rather than business friendly. There's a big difference there, I mean.
Can you elaborate on
Sure.
that?
Okay. So if you see that Malaysians are very good in giving certain incentives for a particular company, A, B, C, whatever company and so on, right?
Okay.
But less open to giving opportunities across the board. So whenever you give certain opportunities to a large company, it crowds out the local companies and so on. That is why you don't find a lot of Malaysian exporters or emerging mid-tier companies which are exporting, because they have to compete with the larger boys who are getting the incentives and so on. So we have to be market friendly rather than business friendly. Now,
we're still quite protectionist in that sense. That's what you're saying, basically.
I wouldn't say we are protectionists, that we are picking and choosing our winners and losers. You know what I mean? We are picking
to protect the local businesses.
Local companies or to attract FDIs, right? And that is why our number of exporters have not increased that much. Okay? So we need to make sure that the same level of incentives which we give to foreign MNCs, right? We give to local entrepreneurs or local companies who are ambitious enough. That's where I think MITI, Trade, with extra budget and so on, can do it, right? I think that's another thing. Make sure that our cost of doing business is low, right? Today is not an age of going too dark green in terms of ESG or whatever. You know what I mean? Because even in Europe today, they're scaling down their ESG targets and so on, because...
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. That's interesting, because I thought right now everyone is talking about ESG, especially in Europe.
ESG is... I always say don't go dark green. Always make sure you're in the middle. You know what I mean? So you want to save the world, which is important and so on, but you must make sure that there's not...
It has to make economic sense.
It has to make economic sense, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. What other findings from Ipsos' latest data that you can share with us on this show?
So I think it's going to be a difficult year for the global economy, again because of the uncertainty. right? The uncertainty. And like I said, we are more worried about the indirect impact and the ripple impact of the trade policies. For example, like I said, if China slows down, Europe slows down, Canada and Mexico slows down, right? There'll be less demand. When there's less demand, there'll be a sluggish growth globally and so on. And we will have difficulties not in terms of exporting to America directly, but also globally, other countries and so on. So I think the ripple impact of these trade policies is something which keeps me awake rather than directly losing market share in America.
Which stem from the US largely.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Kiranjit, for taking the time to be with us here on this episode of Money Matters. Thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure. For
the past half an hour, you've been with us on Money Matters. If you missed any part of today's show, you can always catch it up on Tonton. I'm Muhammed Ahmad Hamdan. Thanks for watching and have a great weekend.